Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening and welcome to the first Power Hour of July 2021. A special thanks to the team at Cyber Exchange for making this happen. And as they reminded me this morning on social media, today marks 1 year of Power Hours. I believe we've covered approximately 35 to 40 of these sessions, and it's been my privilege and honor to be the host of this show. Today, in keeping in line with our typical themes with Power Hour, I'm going to be introducing you to some pretty interesting people. One person who is no stranger to the Cyber Exchange community, and two people making their debut on the Power Hour and on the Cyber Exchange community. And we're going to be talking about a topic which resonates very neatly with the new realities of remote work and digital transformation that we find ourselves living in. Now, you've heard me say this many times before. Competition can make us go faster. Collaboration is what makes us better. And when you think about how teams collaborate together, we all realize that everybody's subscribing to one fundamental ethos, and that is great things in a business don't happen because of one person. They happen because of a team of people. And that team needs to collaborate in a digital environment. But what are some of the challenges when you set up these digital environments? What are some of the challenges when you accord access to people, when you give people certain rights and permissions? And more specifically, when you deploy something like Active Directory, what are some of those walls that you can face while you're doing your deployment? In light of some of the new challenges, in light of some of the new threats and vulnerabilities, today's session on the Power Hour will focus on people, getting you to meet three interesting folks, a little bit of the process, and a little bit of the technology. And hopefully, we will help you overcome some of the walls that you might be running into as you deploy an identity management access program or as you deploy your Active Directory practices. My name is Ali Hirji, and all of you know me as the lead at both the AI Hub and the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation here at Durham College. We're coming to you live through the Cyber Exchange platform, and I do want to recognize that even the online space is Indigenous space, as all of our cables, all of our fiber runs across this land in Canada. And it's absolutely important that we recognize the Indigenous space within which we operate. So without further ado, welcome again. And I'm going to jump right into this session by asking my guests to introduce themselves, but also to tell us a little bit about why this topic is of importance to them. Alex, since you were the mastermind behind bringing our guests together, we'll start off with you. Introduce yourself, although you're in no need of one. Introduce yourself and tell us, why is this topic on Active Directory important to you? Alex?
Thank you, Ali, and pleasure to be here. I'm Alexander Poizner. I'm a founder of Parabellyx Cybersecurity. And identity and access management is an interesting topic because that's something that fundamentally fuels everything that we do in the organization, whether when we're working or studying. The issue with the identity and access management is that it's not a straightforward security subject. And this is why a lot of time security is being neglected. And what we've seen with a lot of various cybersecurity incidents and ransomware attacks is that this neglect makes a much harder recovery. And one of the reasons why a lot of companies end up paying ransom is because they do not put enough accent on resiliency for their identity and access management platform, which is a fundamental for anything that runs in their organization.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate the fact that you've looked at what can happen in the event of Active Directory vulnerabilities or if anything of that sort is being exploited and how that ties into ransomware. And I think this is going to be very important in this session as we look at not just how do you actually successfully and securely deploy an Active Directory environment, but what do you do in the event of something happening? And this is something Parabellyx specializes on a great deal. For our audience, I do recommend that you go onto their social media and their website and enjoy some of those 2 rupees of advice that they share, which are really important from an incident response perspective. And I'm sure we'll see quite a lot of flavor of that coming in this session. So Alex, once again, thank you for joining us. And I'm going to go from one location in Toronto to another location in Toronto and ask Daniel to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about what he does, and why is this topic of interest to him. Daniel?
Thanks, Ali. I'm Deniel Degroot. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer of Real Matters. Real Matters is a financial services company operating in Canada and the US, providing services to major US and Canadian lenders in the appraisal and title spaces. I think this topic is of great interest to me because I'm living the challenge and living with the fear that we get hit by one of these things, as we're the kind of organization that these ransomware groups frequently target and try to make a mess of our shop. So this is a prime topic to make sure that we stay out of the front pages for bad reasons.
I couldn't agree with you even more. And I think that word that you use, the fear, I was often telling some of my students, I don't fear computers, I fear the lack of them. But sometimes I think about why would I actually say that? Because of how everything is digitized right now. The number of ports of entry for something malicious are infinite. And keeping your eyes on that, especially as a CISO, is not entirely an easy job. And this is why one of the things that we may even start talking about, Daniel, is also about how do you prepare yourself in the event of an incident happening, especially if Active Directory is one of those routes that are exploited. I think people often forget the kind of mental health toll that these environments can take on you as well. So we'll be going into this with a very interdisciplinary lens. And Daniel, I appreciate your perspective as always. With that, I will board Alex's private jet and head off to the US, since apparently it is starting to get safe to travel. And I'm going to ask my good man with the fancy mic, Sean, to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about what he does, and in keeping with his colleagues on this show, tell us a little bit about why this subject is important to him.
Thanks, thanks, Ali. So my background, I like to tell people that I've been doing Microsoft identity as long as Microsoft has been doing identity. So back NT4 LAN manager days, and then I was one of the original architects of Intel's Active Directory, and then ran it for 10 years, and then went on to do a variety of things, but including also the hybrid identity. So I was a technology journalist for many years. And so also writing about the cloud as it came out, and specifically around identity in the cloud and Azure Active Directory and all that. But what I have done is come full circle in my career back to focusing on Active Directory, specifically for the reasons that we're talking about now. AD has been around now for 21 years. And so what you have is, in IT terms, you have an ancient technology that has still stood the test of time very well, that is central to most organizations in the world. And it is singularly a target and a pathway for attackers. When you look at what these attackers are doing, 90% of them, and CrowdStrike has said, no, it was Mandiant that said 90% of them have used Active Directory as a pathway for their attacks. So my position, my goal and my role at Semperis is to inform people and help protect them. And that's what we do, is try to help protect them against this access vector of attacks.
I think that aspect where you mentioned you've been doing this for close to about 20 years, or doing AD since Microsoft has been doing identity, is extremely important, because each person on this panel today can author a chapter or two on AD, and there's a lot to be learned from this. So with that, Sean, I will work with what you just said and bring the conversation back to Alex and go follow the same pattern for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And Alex, I want to sort of see what your response is to what Sean said, which is around, there's no questioning that AD has been around for a very long time. Some may argue that it is probably a legacy system and not really catered for modern enterprise. Can we get your perspective on that, Alex?
So the truth is somewhere in the middle, obviously. Active Directory has been there for more than 20 years now. And certainly, people would argue that if you are building the enterprise IT from scratch today, you probably wouldn't be using Active Directory as a base for your identities. You would go straight into the cloud and use something in the cloud, or maybe use some more modernized identity and access management systems. However, with enterprises, we obviously talk about the complexity of the application and technology services ecosystem. And chances are, if you have an ecosystem that complex, you would still need to base your identity and access management on Active Directory one way or another. So we cannot say that Active Directory is going to go away in 2 years, 5 years. We do not know. We are at the mercy of Microsoft, but for now, they continue to invest money, they continue to support Active Directory, and it will continue until certain evolution of the entire ecosystem is going to happen.
Interesting. And I want to work with that just a little bit more to bring both Daniel and Sean to the conversation. And gentlemen, feel free to chime in as we move along. Daniel, if you pay attention to what Alex was mentioning, is that he sort of mentioned that we're kind of at the mercy of the AD environment, especially because how many of our systems are Windows-based. Daniel, A, could you comment a little bit about how Active Directory is positioned for modern enterprise? But B, if I can just throw this question in there, and you can sort of touch on it a little bit, is are teams actually prepared to look at new products outside of AD? What's the mindset like right now from a security standpoint? Daniel?
Yeah, I think I share mostly with Alex's perspective that it's embedded in a lot of organizations in a way that's not trivial to remove it. So, it's not going away anytime soon. I think when you talk to technology people, of course, they're always excited to use the latest and new thing, and they'd be eager to have that on their resume and say, I did a deployment in this or that technology. But then you get to the business reality of, okay, what would that cost? How would we migrate it? What are the risks? How would we make sure we've adapted the management processes, trained people on the new thing? And often it means it practically won't happen because there's no big driver. AD is good enough for most things, for most people, most of the time. So why are you going to, how are you going to convince an executive to spend the money to get off it just because something would be marginally better or have marginally fewer risks?
Interesting. And you brought up the aspect of the risk factor. And I've said this a lot of times, you'll never eliminate risk. You'll only lower the risk barometer to some degree, and you're constantly factoring risk. Speaking of that, Sean, very similar question to you. Speaking of that, similar question that I asked Daniel. Sean, I'll bring that question to you. Is from your perspective, you mentioned it a little bit earlier on that Active Directory has been around for a very, very long time. Could you shed some light on whether you see new products coming into the market that could subsume the kind of hold that AD has? Or do you feel that from a security standpoint, AD sort of gives you a little bit of a control and a little bit of a trust factor that you're willing to continue working with Active Directory environments? Sean?
Yeah, I would add in and fill around the edges with what both Alex and Dan has said. Ultimately, the goal of any business is to make money. It's just in any technology and information technologies to support the business. And for an old technology, man, it just works. And for any organization that's been around for more than a few years, you have a substantial on-premises footprint. And so you end up having to weigh the cost of, there's lots of mind share with the cloud, and the cloud has been adopted for some areas substantially, productivity suites, that sort of thing. But line of business apps for organizations that have been around, they rely on Active Directory. And so you talk to a business leader and they say, it'll cost me how much to put my stuff in the cloud, and what will I get out of it? And, so I personally believe the lowest estimates I've heard for Active Directory petering out is 10 years. And I think it's going to be way more than that, because as long as you have applications in your on-premises computing center that are making money for your business, you're probably going to need AD. And so what has brought AD to the fore is that historically, it's just been dead reliable. People just don't even think about it. You have a natural disaster, there's a tornado here, there's a hurricane there, there's a floods there. AD just keeps on going. And so people that don't live intimately with Active Directory think that it will always be fine. But cyber disasters are different because AD was really designed and brilliantly designed for geographic disasters.
Yeah.
A data center goes down here, a data center goes down there. But for a cyber disaster, it doesn't care about physical locality. It cares about network. So a cyber attack can spread across aided by Active Directory because it was designed when people used AD to find stuff, because it was designed to help you find stuff. So the attackers use the same thing and use that to spread across all of your Active Directory forest in a matter of minutes, which AD was never designed for. And that's the weakness.
Let's work with that weakness element and keep this flow going where we'll go Alex, Daniel, and Sean, and then we'll change that up as we hit the 30-minute mark. Sean, you reminded me of something that a mentor of mine once said, and that was, know what you know well and know what you do not know very, very well. Case in point is that you need to pay attention to your blind spots. Alex, can you help our audience understand that when it comes to Active Directory and some of those security vulnerabilities that sort of bring you into alert, what are some of those? I mean, I'm seeing some of the audience, messaging me saying, hey, we know all the standard stuff like weak passwords or, keeping on legacy accounts or legacy IDs for too long. But what are some of the other things related to security and security vulnerabilities on AD that our audience should be paying attention to? Alex?
Well, if people are following what's going on with various incidents and exploits, they would know that there are a lot of different things that are happening. And one of the main things that the attackers are trying to do, they are trying to go after privileged identities, right? If you have admin account, you can do a lot in the organization. If you don't, well, you need the first thing you need to do is to get admin account. What people do not realize that any attack that starts with an attempt of getting password hashes or elevation of privileges has something to do with Active Directory and the way group policies work, the way authentication work in Windows. And this is something that everybody needs to watch out and protect. I mean, the attackers may start with something very simple, such as running Mimikatz on a local endpoint that they've just breached through malware to try to get some privileged identities. If they don't, they go out on the network. And this is where some weaknesses in the protocols may allow them to either capture hashes or may allow them to reuse various authentication tickets that are coming from Active Directory or forge authentication tickets. So those are weaknesses of in Active Directory implementation of various network protocols. And obviously, moving through that, when we talk about propagation, obviously weaknesses in group policies that are, again, controlled by AD are extremely important for the capability of attacker to propagate very fast across the network. And as well, you have to understand that Active Directory is a very integrated technology. It's heavily integrated with Windows Server, and it's integrated to a point where it's very hard to detach Active Directory and the data in Active Directory from everything else. So once the Windows Server with Active Directory deployment has been compromised, especially when somebody is establishing persistence on those servers or running any malicious processes, it's going to be very hard, A, to detect this, and B, remediate without outright full rebuild.
Interesting points that you brought up here, Alex. And, I think you've again underscored something that you brought up during CISO Forum Canada 2020. And that was, and I think I also saw this on the Parabellyx social media where you said, hackers will hack systems, but the real experts will go after people and will try to exploit those vulnerabilities in terms of people's practices, etc., to break into an Active Directory environment. So excellent points that you brought up, Alex. And I just want to work with that a little bit more and get Daniel's perspective also on where he sees some of those key, very specific vulnerabilities that might emerge from Active Directory. I know, Alex, you mentioned about protocols and how deployments are conducted. Daniel, is there anything that you want to add to what Alex just shared?
I think I would say, yeah, you can go and download like the hardening guide from CIS, and it's 350 pages or whatever.
Right.
And good luck trying to get your sysadmin to go implement all that, right? That can be quite a challenge. And to dig through all the technical specifics. So, to figure out where are the specific weaknesses that you have to harden. So it has to be easy for these guys because they're busy. They've got 4 or 5 different applications they're maintaining and keeping up, and spending a whole day in group policies is not where they want to be necessarily. So yeah, I think part of this is to sort of make, similar to the challenges we've seen that Microsoft has gone through with, more of the security needs to be out of the box rather than you deploy your Active Directory, now here's 300 things you have to remember to do or you're going to get compromised tomorrow, right? If it's like that, you're going to get burned. It has to be easier.
Interesting. I've seen actually 1 or 2 questions come into me by direct message. So to the audience, I understand if you don't want to drop them in the chat and you want to direct message them to me, that's fine. But if you also want to get in touch with the team at Parabellyx or anybody that's on the panel, you can reach out to them on the Cyber Exchange platform. But keep those questions coming in. Gentlemen, there are 2 questions, but I'll sort of bring them in when we're about 15 minutes away from the close, and I'll weave them into the discussions as we move along. Sean, digging a little bit into what Daniel had shared. I've always, when I run a variety of projects, I always maintain this approach and this philosophy that is the best teams function the best when, or the reason that they function the best is because nobody really cares who takes credit for what achievement. The end goal is always where we're headed towards. But the reality on the floor is, as much as my idealistic tropes can work well in academia, the reality in industry is that we have teams, and teams operate in different ways, and there are silos that exist. So the first question that I want to ask you, and then I'll go to Daniel and Alex, is management of Active Directory, is it really a security-only function, or does it fall onto the system administrators? Does it fall onto another information technology department within a company? Sean?
Well, historically, Ali, Active Directory has been part of infrastructure and operations. Yeah. So the people that are maintaining it look at themselves as data center people, as server people, and we have grown into being just AD administrators, was what we used to call ourselves, and now we're calling ourselves identity professionals, which sounds a lot better. But historically, we've not been focused on security. But as security has shown itself to be critical in protecting the company, is the security of Active Directory. More and more, the trend has been that the AD security has moved into the security department, because historically, AD people were really focused on the smooth operation and the correct delegation, and all that. They were really not focused on security hardening and attacks and all of that, and don't necessarily understand all of the attacks that can happen. Now that they have become more and more part of security, you are starting to see that improve considerably.
And Alex, if I can bring you back in, and then we'll go to Daniel. Alex, you've heard a little bit of the historical patterns of where Active Directory has usually sat as a function. And an interesting question has come in from Eva Radar that I think of this question I'm going to have to bring up a little bit earlier because it's really relevant to what we're talking about. Alex, from your perspective right now, are you seeing any changes in the horizon to what Sean has painted for us? Do you see teams approaching this differently? Do you see security conversations happening differently around Active Directory? Alex?
Well, security definitely is paying more attention to Active Directory these days. I mean, there were days before ransomware became an issue where security in larger enterprises would look at Active Directory from more of a governance perspective, providing instructions to the management team. However, this day it changes. Obviously, cybersecurity is more concerned about any vulnerabilities that may happen. They are also concerned about various things such as management of various privileges, especially the administrator privileges in Active Directory. But I also see a very positive trend where where security team is asking the Active Directory management team, the infrastructure team, about Active Directory resiliency in terms of if something happens, how can we recover? And they're participating in planning the recovery process in terms of making sure that if the recovery is necessary, you can recover to a point where you can say that Active Directory is not compromised. And that's a very important point, because in case you need to recover Active Directory, and in case of an incident, one of the first things you'll have to recover is Active Directory.
Yeah.
The main question is how to make sure that whatever you've recovered is clean, and it's not going to be a jump point for the attacker to compromise and encrypt the environment again. So that this is where security becomes much more proactive. And I love the fact that it's no longer just about security. It's about resilience. This is amazing. This is what security teams in many companies are doing right with Active Directory right now.
Now, I really like the way all of you have shaped this conversation, is that I think you've all sort of respected the fact that there are individual teams, there are groups of teams within an organization, but you have to find a way in which you work together, and you've got to share best practices, especially because of how intermingled our functions are. Now, I still remember this so it was in 2007 when I landed in Canada. One of my profs, when we were talking about some of the theoretical aspects of deploying new software and new protocols versus the practical side, he said, you know what? If you ask me, is there a difference between theory and practice? He said, well, in theory, there is no difference between theory and practice. They all have to meet at some point, and they all have to come together. Which brings us to my next question. And this ties into a question that has come in. As part of our conversation flow, now is the time when we're going to talk about how do gangs exploit Active Directory for maximum return, and what are they looking for within Active Directory? And I'm going to read this question out verbatim because it's really nicely put together. And the question is, what is the percentage with regards to threat actors or gangs of threat actors going after GPO, group policy objects, and either modifying a GPO or creating a GPO, which is to push out the ransomware encryption itself, or a persistence mechanism? Anybody of the three who would like to take that on, the floor is yours for now and forever.
I'll take a swing at this.
All right.
It is, so I've not seen anything that specifically drills down to the group policy aspect of it. However, I will go back to the quote by the Mandiant that says, of their client organizations that they've consulted with in attack remediation and incident response, 90% of the clients said Active Directory was involved in that. Right. And so, yes, group policy and software distribution and group policy, or the creation of group policy and linking it to a site to distribute malware or otherwise weaken configurations, is absolutely part of it. That is the common thread. And Alex said earlier, and people have asked the questions, well, what are all the different methods that ransomware gangs use to attack? Well, I think it's really pretty well known. And I wanted to actually come back to an earlier question where someone said, essentially they said, yeah, we've heard about password strength, et cetera, et cetera. What's the other stuff? Well, the reality is it's still passwords. It's still multi-factor authentication. I watched at Identiverse, I watched a presentation by Alex Weinert, who is the director of identity security for Microsoft, all of Microsoft, commercial, Azure Active Directory, Xbox. And he went in detail about SolarGate, Nobelium, SolarWinds. And the really fascinating, surprising statistic is that only 15%, less than 15% were compromised through the supply chain attack of SolarWinds. The rest of it was done through password spray, where they attack multiple accounts with simple passwords until they get in. And then they use the same process. They used Active Directory as a pathway. They compromised all of Active Directory. They then compromised ADFS, and that allowed them to jump into the cloud. He said that in every circumstance where the Microsoft 365 tenant was compromised, the threat actors had full control over the on-premises environment, and they did it via Active Directory.
Sean, the questions are starting to pour in. Gentlemen, you folks are definitely intriguing the crowd with some of your comments here. I'm going to bring in another. I know I said we'll wait a little bit on the questions, but I'm going to let them weave in. Alex, I'll go to you and then to Captain Daniel. Alex, the question that's come up here is in response to Sean, and that is, and I'll read this verbatim again, it's a direct message to me. Does all of this matter in terms of password protection? Does any of this actually matter? Because at the end of the day, isn't the goal for the bad actors to get at the admin account? So as long as the administrative privileges are maintained strongly, somebody guessing a password for a regular end user probably doesn't wreak as much damage. Alex, your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, it's all about progress and it's all about velocity for those who are attacking. I mean, the ultimate goal is through privileged accounts. Now, if the organization has done things right, privileged accounts are segmented to a specific part of the organization. So they may need to get to multiple privileged accounts rather than a single privileged account. For this, you cannot really say, hey, I'm going to compromise 2 or 3 systems, and then I'm going to fish out all of the privileged account hashes from the network, or I'm going to get them from the system memory. Usually in complex organizations, that's important. So this is why they're going to go after multiple accounts, multiple non-privileged accounts, just to be able to get on more systems and be able from those systems, either from the memory or from the network, to try to get passwords or find vulnerability on those systems that will allow additional actions such as authentication, tokens reuse, forgery, so on and so forth. Also, something that I want to mention, and that also goes back to the previous question, is look, one thing is to distribute malware through group policy. Now, it's pretty fast. However, it's also a very blunt way. And if you're detected, there will be remediation right away. What I've seen people do when they're smart about it is changing certain things, configuration parameters in the group policy, subtle changes that will allow the attacker, in case of being identified and in case of remediation, to take over the network and the systems much faster the second time they're in. So this is the most dangerous thing about group policies. This is why group policies should be monitored for changes. It's not about distributing malware, it's those subtle changes that you may not even understand initially that will simply allow for the next attack to go much faster.
Alex, as always, you've spoken, and both theory and practice coming together really neatly. Alex, you know, that last line that you mentioned, much faster, at least for me, in my limited experience, I'd say that is the key line that you just mentioned over there. And I know I have quite a few of my grad students that are listening to this session as well. And by the way, I let them skip class to join this session, Alex. That's how important you are to us at Durham College. But you know, one thing that I always mention in class is, you know, when you think about bad actors, there's motivation and there's discipline. Motivation keeps them going. Discipline keeps them growing. These are motivated and disciplined actors. Once they get into the environment, they're going to find other ways to go and change some of those policies that exist. And it all happens over time. It goes slowly, and then things start to move a little quicker. And that takes me to my next question. And Daniel, we'll come to you, go to Sean, and then come to Alex. And that will then take us to about 20 minutes or 15 minutes away from the close. Keep your questions coming into the audience. Daniel, you know, from a management perspective, a dashboarding perspective, do you feel that organizations using and deploying AD are well equipped to monitor in the event of some suspicious activities? What are some best practices you might be able to recommend for monitoring around AD usage and AD protocols? Danny?
Well, going back to your comment about know what you don't know,
Yep.
I think this is something where, you know, I have a smaller team and we don't have like a guru AD specialist. So we have, you know, engaged a third-party service for a lot of that monitoring, who have that professional ability to know, you know, what does Mimikatz look like on an endpoint and what indicators are compromised to keep up with the ransomware gangs. So a large part of that is finding the suitable expertise of the people who know the details for it. I suspect, yeah, my guess is this is a gap in a lot of organizations that it's difficult to think of all the different things you could monitor because the ransomware groups change their tactics as defenses adapt. They're going to move on to something else. As long as there's data that they can encrypt and make a lot of money by getting you to pay them to decrypt it, they're going to keep trying new things. So it's not like there's going to be a magic solution that fixes it all.
Absolutely. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Speaking of preparing for the worst and forewarned, being forearmed, Captain Sean, in the event that an organization, and let's focus on any size of an organization, but let's even stay specific to mid-size organizations, which may have some budget. In the event of an Active Directory exploit, what does a good response plan look like? And if I can even add on another layer to this pretty loaded question, because that's what I specialize in, do organizations even have an adequate response plan when it comes to any mishaps with AD?
Well, there are a number of ways to answer that, Ali. I think that in incident response and what in the US is the NIST cybersecurity framework, the during the attack aspect of it, is to understand what the vulnerabilities are that are being attacked at any given time. And I would like to point out that my company offers a free Active Directory security analysis tool called Purple Knight, purple-knight.com. And we've been talking about indicators of exposure and potentially indicators of compromise. That's a free tool, downloadable, that analyzes your Active Directory for 72 different indicators of exposure. Doesn't require any elevated rights in the environment. You might want to tell your SOC about it from some of the queries that it does. But that goes to the heart of what you're talking about for group policy vulnerabilities or any, Mimikatz DC shadow footprints, all sorts of stuff and vulnerabilities to help that. We have found that in the course of incident response that companies have used Purple Knight to quickly review the environment. It takes a matter of minutes to run, and found, for example, a new domain administrator that wasn't there before, or evidence that DC shadow attack has been initiated, which then gives them an idea of where to go look. Because of course, and sort of riffing off of what Dan said, is you don't know what you don't know. So the first thing you have to figure out is what you don't know. So that has been one of the aspects of it, very much so. In terms of monitoring it continuously, I have to say, so we have a solution called Directory Service Protector that monitors AD from the replication stream. So we actually see every change that happens in AD and have the ability to roll it back, in addition to being able to see everything in terms of the security indicators. So to wrap up the question, I guess what I would say is, yeah, you need to be able to see what the changes are. And sometimes that is, what is the traffic happening between the clients and the domain controllers, or then what actual changes are being made to Active Directory, and then be able to just immediately say, no, that shouldn't happen, roll it back, as being critical to it.
Fantastic points there. And Alex, I'm going to bring the same question to you because this is what your team also specializes in, making sure that your protocols are being followed as is and that you have visibility into what's happening into your environments. And you and I have spoken about this a great deal, that eyesight is useless if insight is blind. Just because you're seeing something happen, you need to have insight into why certain things are happening. Can I ask you this question, because this has also come in through a direct message, is has the hyper remote work environment impacted AD in a negative or a positive way? Can you provide some perspective on what COVID has done to your Active Directory experiences?
Well, the hybrid remote work, or what we call the more modern workspace, it's done some amazing things. First of all, I want to say that it's positive because it's shown us that collaboration doesn't have a borders or a walls of a single building. And people during the COVID continued working, continued collaborating, and continue delivering as well or even better than they were in the office. However, we've seen certain shifts in cybersecurity which were coming, and they were accelerated by the pandemic. And one shift is, look, we had built hard shells around companies. We've built perimeters using firewalls and various network security devices. Now that we have people working from the outside, the perimeter became irrelevant. Your new perimeter is your endpoint, the laptop that user has at home, and your identity, right? Which is often either provided by Active Directory directly or supported by Active Directory by replicating it into the cloud, such as Microsoft Azure. So obviously, protecting endpoints and protecting identities that are no longer in the office is much harder job, because first of all, before a pandemic and before the whole modern workspace became a big topic, we didn't have solutions that are good enough for an endpoint running on an untrusted network. And that's essentially what your home is, because in the home, we don't know. Your corporate laptop might be fine, but another computer at home might be compromised, or your Wi-Fi may have been compromised, or it doesn't really matter. And same thing with the identities, right? When you're working from home, the social engineering approach to getting your identities, compromising your identities, have changed tremendously, and those are the main dangers. Now, how does it come to Active Directory protection? Well, first of all, your endpoint is still ultimately connected to Active Directory, and it becomes an extension of Active Directory to some extent, and this is where the initial vector of attack is happening. Also, in terms of compromised identities, well, if you have companies right now that do not have MFA for external access, I urge you to reconsider, because compromising an identity, having a username and password, that's very easy in our world. And the only that stands between that and a bigger incident is that second factor authentication into your corporate systems. So that becomes extremely important. But again, the problem is, once the endpoint is compromised and you're connected through VPN and it's free for all access to network environment, guess what? That's where attacker is going to come in, and the next thing that you would know, there will be persistence somewhere in the network, in the organization, and the attack will continue. And this attack definitely is going to use Active Directory. Like Sean said, 90% of them do. So that's extremely important.
Great, and thank you for that, Alex and Sean. And to our audience, below as you're watching this feed, you'll see some tickers over there. But if you do want links to some of the items that Sean mentioned, just mention it in the chat on cyberexchange.ca, and someone from the CyberX team will collect those links and share them with you. I also recommend is that if you stay on the Cyber Exchange platform, you can watch this session on demand. And if there are any links that you want more details about, you can hear about them again by revisiting the Power Hour. We're also reaching out to all of the fine individuals that are on this panel today. We've got approximately 14.5 minutes to go, and a few more questions that have come in, and a few questions that we had as part of our script. But in keeping with my normal style, I have not followed any script. And hopefully my panelists are okay with that, or else I will hear about it in the green room. Captain Daniel, just a heads up, in the chat, somebody by the name of Ben says, "Hi, Dan," and I assume that is you. So Ben, hi, thank you for joining us. And I'm assuming Daniel also is saying thank you for joining. Daniel, question for you. An Active Directory attack, let's say, an exploit has happened, Active Directory has been utilized, etc. What does a good recovery plan look like to a CISO? Daniel?
I just want to step back to address a couple things here. So, in terms of the monitoring, going back to it, and MFA, if you watch the alerts that come out of like the US government CERT bodies and so forth, a lot of it is about the various VPN vulnerabilities that have been discovered over the last couple of years, and the Cisco, AnyConnect, and Pulse VPN, and a couple others like that. And we've seen that traffic in our monitoring. Whether or not you have it, you'll see the attacks coming in if you're watching your IDS. So clearly that is a major entry point for them, is that they can just breach your VPN. They can do a lot of damage from there. So I do share Alex's view on the multi-factor being a major point of feeling safe and secure, that you're not just one bad password or breached hash away from a bad guy in your network. To go to your question directly, I suppose, yeah, the ability to restore things to, within an acceptable range of time, like a classic BCP DR answer, right? This is sort of a disaster recovery plan scenario, except it's caused by a cyber attack instead of a data center burning down. So do you have the data? Are you sure that it hasn't been tampered with? And is it restorable to a point where, the business impact is manageable? So if you have to roll your Active Directory back to like 3 months ago, that's probably pretty bad, but at least if you have it, that's a better option than we don't have it and you have to rebuild from scratch.
Okay. Building from scratch, and that allows me to go into the mistakes that some companies might make in the event that they've experienced a breach. And again, AD being the subject of our discussion today. Sean, if I can come to you, and then we'll go to Alex, then we'll wrap up with the final set of questions. Sean, what are some common mistakes that you see in companies that are attempting to recover from a breach, especially as it relates to AD? Sean?
Sure. And this is sort of the core of, I was talking about my big journey of coming around and back to AD. There is a unique vulnerability in Active Directory that if you are not associated with it, you are not aware of. And that is this: you take backups of your Active Directory domain controllers, you take system state backups, you take third-party backups, whatever. You think that you're fine. But the reality is, if you've been hit by malware, it has already been sitting on your servers for days or weeks or even months. So your backups contain the malware. So when you restore from the backups, you're restoring the malware. And I've talked to customers that have had sort of a Groundhog Day situation, and they keep getting it again and again. The key is to separate your Active Directory backups from the operating system itself, and to understand that that's where the vulnerability is. So this has a couple of twists to it. One is the specter of what is called Active Directory forced recovery. So if you are not associated with Active Directory, this is the thing that has kept AD administrators up at night for the last 21 years. It is the rebuilding of Active Directory from backups or from whatever you have that many, many companies have had to do as a result of this ransomware. Forced recovery is what will get your Active Directory back without having the malware on it, because you're only restoring the Active Directory service. But it is a hideous, twisted, time-consuming process. It's 28 steps, multiple threads across multiple data centers. And if an organization has put together that disaster recovery process, and our surveys show that more than 50% have either never tested it or they've never even put it together because they've never had to before this ransomware stuff. It takes days or weeks to do this, and your company is down until then. So I beseech everybody to go back and look at the forced recovery process, put something together that they have, and test it. Now, we offer an automated process, but I really am saying everybody needs to go back and look at it, because AD is uniquely vulnerable to this. And the further away you are from working with AD, the less people realize that it's even necessary.
Fantastic points. And I think that aspect that you mentioned about automating it versus actually having a process in place that involves human intelligence and human eyes looking at things is an extremely delicate balance that needs to be struck. And definitely, Alex and team, if we decide to do another session on this, that would be one of the topics in terms of automating security as it relates to AD, one of the topics that I'd really like to dive deep into with all of you. So Sean, as always, thank you for those comments. We've got time for about 2 to 3 more questions. I'm just going to try to weave them in really quickly before we get to closing remarks. Alex, again, keeping in tune with my style, off script, this question has come in twice. And I expected this to come in. And I think these are coming in from small to medium business owners that just want to know a little bit about what to do in the event that the only way to recovery is to actually pay out that ransom. How do you guide companies in that situation, Alex?
Well, first of all, my advice is when we're dealing with ransomware attacks, this is a team effort. When it comes to a situation where you have to make a decision on paying ransom, this is not something that is going to come just from you and your cybersecurity service provider. Your insurance company most likely is going to get involved.
Yeah.
Your legal team most likely is going to get involved. Sometimes even law enforcement team is going to get involved. So this is something that needs to be a part of your response plan. You need to understand roles and responsibilities. You need to understand if you need to proceed with payment negotiation and payment, how you're going to do it, who needs to be involved. Like I said, it's not just a cybersecurity team that needs to be involved in this. So you will need to identify those experts and partners before
Absolutely.
you go into this, and then from there, yes, there are different processes in terms of obviously the biggest question is negotiating, moving the money, understanding whether there is a necessary assurance in terms of you being able to recover. All of those things are important, but none of those things can be made in silo, and definitely not by just cybersecurity team.
Absolutely. And again, security and identity as an interdisciplinary approach is extremely important. And I really like the way in which you've articulated it again, Alex. And to the audience that's watching, if you are interested in learning more about how Parabellyx approaches some of these scenarios, my team at Durham College is actually working on a project with them, more on the compliance side of things and automating compliance testing. But I do recommend you reach out to Alex, Manoj, Eric, and team to look at some of the security playbooks that they have in mind, especially the breach coaching playbooks that they have. Very, very helpful, very useful. And you can reach out to their team on cyberexchange.ca. Daniel, a question for you, and that is when it comes to Active Directory resilience, and when it comes to planning, how do you keep your teams trained? What kind of professional development activities do you keep them abreast of? Do you do tabletop exercises? What do you engage them with to ensure that they're constantly checking and rechecking and going through their evolving security checklist when it comes to AD? Daniel?
Yeah, so I suppose the typical things are to ensure that your sys administrators are getting a level of security awareness training particular to their role. So your Windows administrators are at least brought up to the basic points, that they're aware of these things like management of their administrator accounts. Obviously, you have your general user awareness training on phishing and so forth, and social engineering to keep them abreast of that stuff. And then, cyber incident exercises are valuable in fleshing out the kinds of issues like, oh, we don't have a backup of that thing, or only that guy has the credentials for this, and figuring out those little gotchas that will burn you in an emergency because someone's on vacation or your critical resource isn't around, figuring out where you might have a one-man show going on, and you've got to spread some knowledge around and make sure everyone knows the lay of the land and knows what where to get what's needed to do the job.
Absolutely. And I really like that aspect of no one person is an island, and training and awareness programming is absolutely essential. For those of you who are listening as well, next week at Cyber Exchange 3.0, the challenge statement edition, you'll be hearing about games from eSports Cyber and the digital tabletop exercise, which looks at responding to a situation happening within I think it's a utility or a power facility. And ransomware is a part of that. So I do recommend to our audience, again, these are all tying in very neatly, that you do watch that. I believe it's on Tuesday, July 13th, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. So mark that in your calendars. We are coming very close to the end, so I'm going to turn it around to each individual to provide a closing statement. And Sean, I'll start with you. We'll go to Daniel, and then the mic drops with Captain Alex. Although, Sean, you are the one with the most fanciest mic, but we'll let Alex drop his. Sean, from your perspective, seeing some of the things, I mean, in the green room, we were talking about recent attacks, recent alerts, especially on the supply chain side of things. Where do you see, if it was a crystal ball of prediction, where do you see security and Active Directory going over the next couple of years? Sean?
Well, and actually, Alex, since you pointed out my mic, I'll shamelessly shill for my hybrid identity protection podcast.
Hoping you do that.
Yeah, so we have lots of great identity professionals talking about security aspects of not just Active Directory, but Azure Active Directory and all aspects related to that. Where it's going, it's both scary and interesting. We're seeing almost an asymptotic rise in these attacks and the impact of these attacks as the barriers seem to start falling down. So supply chain attacks, we're starting to see critical infrastructure attacks, because that's not just nation states anymore. It's people that are doing it that don't care, that are doing it for money, so they don't care what they attack. I heard the phrase teenagers with flamethrowers. There is a great quote, and I know we're almost out of time, from Huntress Labs that was involved in this Kaseya incident that we're all aware of. And what they say, and this is a fantastic way to think about it, they say that in Florida, hurricanes happen. Florida businesses are not measured on whether they can prevent a hurricane from happening. They're measured on how fast they can recover. So in 2021, cybersecurity incidents are the inevitable hurricane. Your business is not judged by whether you can prevent an incident, but rather by how fast you can recover.
Very, very well said. And, that is one of those quotes that need to go on a shirt. So to the Cyber Exchange team that's watching, I know you have the vault in the store where you make very fancy shirts and stickers, so on and so forth. Let's do one courtesy Huntress Labs around that note that was made about how you are measured because of your resilience. Absolutely wonderful quote, Sean. Sean, there is one very quick question. I'll give you 5 seconds to respond. Is it possible to get access to a demo version of Purple Knight?
Yes.
Okay. So Eva Radar, if you go on cyberexchange.ca, we'll make sure Sean has an account there, and you can reach out to him and he will get you a demo version set up of that. There were a couple of more questions that came in around ransomware, so on and so forth. And I do promise you, we will have more of these sessions. So we'll come to a bit of your questions later on. Daniel, we'll turn it over to you. A closing comment on where you see the future of security and AD heading.
It'll be a muddle. That's my short answer. I, in a past organization, was trying to get rid of its mainframe, but for similar reasons, it was rock solid reliable, and it was just difficult to ever really get rid of it because, nobody wanted to transition this super critical application off this super reliable platform, despite the number of advantages. So I think some organizations that start fresh and don't have the legacy burden will be cloud native and so forth, but it'll be some time before that's the majority, if that's to be the case.
It'll be a muddle, another item to put on a shirt. That's the best response to the board when they ask you a question about what the future is going to hold. Alex, you know what? I know I wanted to give you closing comments, but I think there's a question here that I think will allow you and help you with the mic drop comment that we're waiting for. So hopefully you have a nice fancy quote as well. Alex, and this question is from the organizations that you helped recover from ransomware, and they've paid ransom in some cases. How many of them get hit again and why? Alex?
Well, I cannot give you the percentage, but the overall consensus is that about a quarter of organizations that get ransomware attack, they get hit again. The reason why they get hit again is usually an overconfidence. In fact, that if a lightning struck once, it's going to strike another place.
Yep.
Which is not true. We know lightning is going to strike the highest point. If this is the highest point, the lightning is going to strike it again. The thing that people have to remember about closing the holes with Active Directory and overall in the organization. It's all about overconfidence and over-reliance. When we're talking about overconfidence, it's not just about that it's not going to happen again, but hey, we've successfully recovered and we do not have any issues because we don't see any. Well, it's never about what you see, it's about what you don't see. So that's why even after you recover successfully, and even if there is no seeming continuation of attack, there are still a lot of things that companies need to do in terms of continuously testing the security after the ransomware attack. And that's something that people, after having a sprint with a lot of resources, simply stop doing. The other thing is over-reliance on specific things. We're talking about over-reliance on our endpoint detection and response. We're talking about over-reliance on our firewalls, SIEM, Active Directory. One of the things that we've already mentioned is compartmentalize. Think about the things that you may want to have without Active Directory, like access to your backups. Do you need Active Directory to manage your backups? I don't think so. Do you need Active Directory to manage your virtual farms? I don't think so, because that's a recipe for disaster. What about access to the gold images for the systems? No, never use Active Directory for that. So over-reliance on things is bad, including over-reliance on Active Directory. Now, I know that it's really hard to piece all of this together. That's why we do have services to help organizations to become resilient to ransomware and secure Active Directories. We also have managed services around Active Directory protection, both in terms of the monitoring as well as in terms of backup and recovery, where we can do it, first of all, more efficiently and making look at more things than your usual security monitoring is going to look at. But more importantly, you will be able to recover it fast.
As always, keeping true with time, he's been able to give you a detailed response fast and efficiently. And that is the standard statement and the standard signature of Parabellyx. So Alex, thank you for those closing comments. And I agree with you 100%. Diversify. That is one of the mantras that we've been hearing from today. There were a lot of other areas of discussion that we could have gotten into. And I know quite a few people also messaged about talking about insider threats and future predictions in terms of where Active Directory is heading in terms of future releases. And I'm sure if there is demand for it, we will be looking at doing more sessions. With that, I am going to thank Sean, Daniel, and Alex for joining us. And I'm going to ask them to stay on so that we can just have a 30-second to a minute debrief in the green room. But to our audience, once again, thank you for joining us, Daniel, Ala, Sean, and Alex. Thank you again for taking the time. I know some of you have very, very busy, all of you have very, very busy schedules. And for taking the time, I am truly, truly grateful. You know how the saying goes, right? None of us are as smart as all of us. And all of you put together has shown us some of the smarts and the brains that we have here in North America when it comes to thinking about Active Directory and improving our resiliency when it comes to situations related to AD. To our audience, thank you for joining us. This is Ali Hirji signing off. And before I sign off, let me remind you that next week is Cyber Exchange 3.0. Cyber Exchange 3.0 will be running for 5 days with different days, different topics for different days, and about 20-odd companies responding to different challenge statements. I'm one of the co-chairs. The conference is chaired by Daniel Pinsky, Helen Oakley, Karen Nemani, and myself. And I truly hope to see you all throughout next week from 8 a.m. to, I believe, 5 p.m. on cyberexchange.ca. This is Ali Hirji once again signing out. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are, and we'll see you at the very next session of the Power Hour, which will be announced very soon. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.